Good. I would say good morning, but I guess it could be any time of the day when people listen to this. Welcome to the second edition of, we're calling it a coaching clinic, but as part of our extras. Thank you for the feedback that we've got from both the undergraduate and postgraduate students. I particularly like the feedback to say that they turned the screen off when they were listening to us because they didn't want to see our faces for an hour. Hopefully with our guest today, that will be slightly different. Myself, Tom and Tom won't introduce ourselves again, but we're joined today by Andrew Joslin, who's kindly given up his time to speak with us about how we might coach during COVID. So, Andy, could you give us a quick introduction, please, of yourself?
Yeah, morning, guys. Thanks for the invitation. As always, just a brief overview. Andrew Joslin, work at Fulham Football Club with the age groups between under 15s and 16s. Worked at Fulham for around 5 to 6 seasons now.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, that was short and sweet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like me to go on?
No. I'm sure your expertise and experience will come out in some of the discussions that we'll have. Decided to, as I previously mentioned, discuss and share with you what we're doing with our players over the last sort of 2 and 3 weeks. And we'll have a general discussion around some of the approaches we've used. But first, I'd like to ask you three, I guess, an opening question around, can we coach during COVID, and what does coaching look like?
Where do you want to start?
Well, on my screen, you are the biggest, Tom Hounsell, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think this is new for everybody, right? It's really challenging. I think the first part is that we have to start to probably consider who our learners are, and then ultimately, how well prepared do we think we've enabled them to be able to deal with situations where ultimately they have to take an active role in self-regulating their own learning. And also, I suppose, reflect on ourselves as coaches, what that looks like for us. So how effective are we at self-regulating our own capacity to coach and be engaged in coaching processes when we're in a period of self-isolation? So I suppose that process of maybe enhanced goal setting, self-monitoring, strategizing, reflection, how well equipped are we as practitioners to be able to deal with this period, but then as a consequence, probably how well prepared have we enabled our players to be able to deal with this period as well. So I think the problem that probably a lot of us are facing is maybe we either weren't particularly diligent at facilitating those skills, or maybe it wasn't the top of our agenda, but we're now in a process where those people who have maybe spent a long time trying to invest in developing those skills of their players might be in a more fruitful position. But I certainly think that in relation to engaging with players across this period of time, helping them wrestle and navigate through this period is a really important part of our professional practice, and I think it's something that we should be investing in heavily.
Yeah, that's a really good start, Tom. Thanks for that. We'll get on to, I think the next topic will be around our reflections and looking back retrospectively and what we have done to enable more effective coaching, but that's a great start. Tom and Andy, what do you reckon, what would your thoughts be on our ability to coach during COVID?
I think, as Tom says there about, and I think it probably is an even greater challenge maybe for me working with younger players than both Andy and Tom do, that probably had less opportunity to kind of create that ability for those players to self-regulate their own learning. That we've still had really regular contact, and I'm sure I'll share what that has looked like a little bit more later. But we've had this regular contact with them, but probably not in a sense of developing them as football players at the moment. It's probably been far more around just checking in on not just how they are, but also their families as well. But I think the process that we go through this season in terms of trying to develop some really individual characteristics within them and identifying both their strengths and their areas of development should really have, or hopefully will have, a large impact during this period, where the fact that we've reinforced that over probably 7-8 months, that even at 8 and 9 years of age they'll have an understanding of what it is they need to develop. And I suppose the challenge for some of them is that they've got a huge garden to work in, and some might not have access to that at all. So that becomes really problematic. About, they might have an understanding of what it is they need to develop, but they might not actually have the resource to actually go and do that. So I suppose that makes our job even more challenging, to try and support them in how they try and advance those skills. But as Tom said, it's a challenge that we're certainly facing as well, about how best to do it, and a bit of uncharted territory. So I think in a lot of the work we do when we're on the grass at our clubs, we've got a lot of retrospective stuff to look back on and kind of compare to. But in this situation, we don't have that. So it's a challenge, but one that hopefully we can start to find some real positives out of. Hopefully moving into next season.
Yeah. Jos, can you just sort of maybe finish up with some of your thoughts on this opening question? You might need to, Jos, unmute yourself.
Apologies. Yeah, I think I'll just jump off the back of what Tom Howard just said about understanding context. Is probably the thing that we try to invest the most amount of time in when going into this process. So we've obviously got, across 2 age groups, 30 plus players that come from varying situations, varying home lives, and probably in terms of the way that they would engage with a home program are all really different. So I think myself and Hounsell spent quite a bit of time in the first sort of 2 weeks just getting a little bit of a grip and an idea of where individuals sit within some of the platforms that potentially we might look to use. And then at Fulham, we like to think that we run an individualised programme. So I guess really trying to go down that narrative as much as possible to support the players. I think going back to your original question, I think, yes, we need to coach the players. As I said, it will look very different per individual, and understanding what players can and can't do in relation to some of the content that we send out, I think is really, really important. Essentially, what we've tried to do is continue some of the work that myself, Tom, and the wider MDT staff have been working towards with the group for the last sort of, season, really. We have a season plan in place. We have an individual plan in place for each of the group. And most recently, we've been working on a particular playing theme, which we've tried to now link to some individual clips of some elite stuff. So we've looked at Mönchengladbach, for example. They're playing in quite a similar way that we've looked to play, and really it's just an extension of some of the work that's been going on, as I said, across the season. And we're hoping through some analysis, through some individual tasks technically, through some video calls and
Is he frozen there? Yeah. I'll before we wait for Andy to jump back in, but just on that, and it's a fascinating opening. And sorry, Josh, you froze there, so we're just I'm just bouncing on to sort of the next theme and just saying, it's really interesting around the different approaches that maybe people are taking and how they're linking or how they're engaging with players, and we've all spoken about the wider support systems that are in place with regards to the players and the family and so on. Just taking some time to reflect on our coaching that we've done this season and maybe over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. What do you think you have done that has allowed you to have a smooth transition to the place we're currently in?
I think it's just important to probably like consider to what extent like the syllabus or curriculum, however you want to describe it, in the player development system is organised to promote a more like longer term development, but also like in this like iterative and like ongoing process. So I think Jo's like touched on it really, is like actually we have a season plans, we have a body of work that's like transitions across the whole season, and as a consequence of that, and having players invested in the season plan and then being like consciously aware of how they as an individual fit within that plan is just makes the process a lot smoother, because in essence you're not deviating away from the plan. Like the plan still exists, and that will also be like reflected on and utilized to be able to like strategically plan next year as well. So this is just a period of the season plan. It probably isn't the way in which we envisage it being, i.e. we're not like on the grass, we're not playing games, but the things that we still intended to focus on across this period of time remain the same. So for a player, it probably becomes easy like path to follow, because in essence this hasn't really caused any bumps in the road necessarily, and it's not that we like trying to smooth this process out, but it just means that like you're quite clear as a player in your mind like what the goals for the season are, and then as an individual how they in essence engage with that process. I think the challenge for all of us during like I suppose this period of time is just like the skills for learning part, which is just very different. So the skills for learning that they need when they're on the grass with us as coaches is very different to like now the skills for learning that they need to engage with different technological platforms, interpret information in different ways, feedback to the coaches and engage with coaches in a different way. So like I don't know if anybody's prepared their players to be able to do that, just because we probably didn't think it was going to be operationally that like important. But I think the underlying like ideas of like being committed to achieving a specific goal are something that the players are invested in, and therefore like continue to be over this period of time.
Thanks for that, Tom. And what we'll come on to, which I think will probably create lots of discussion around retrospectively thinking about what we haven't done that would have helped during this time. But Jos, same sort of question to you. Retrospectively, what have you done? And maybe looking at more of your coaching behaviours, perhaps around what are the positive behaviours that you think you've engaged with throughout the course of the season and your time as a coach that maybe have now put you and the players in a good place during this period of time?
Yeah, I think one, just making the players accountable for like how they respond to coaching, I think essentially is probably the most important thing. We want players to be able to self-regulate, as you guys alluded to earlier, and that includes not just in this period we're in with no football, but actually during sessions and post game. We want players to be able to take on information, apply that in relation to their targets, and have a real good awareness of the improvements they're making. So hopefully now during this time where there's no coaching going on the grass, they just transfer that skill across into like an online portal where they're now probably feeding back to the coaches through Huddle or through video analysis. And we can very much support that process still. I think I've worked with the current 15-16s group for probably 4 or 5 years on and off now, and I think I'd like to think that during that long period we've allowed the players to have opportunity to, one, engage with using like an analysis software regularly, and two, having the opportunity to, one, reflect on their own development throughout that period of time, whether it be through analysis sessions, whether it be through reviews, individual reviews, player-parent reviews. There's been a number of key milestones throughout, 4, 5, 6 year period where, we're asking the boys to constantly, one, reflect, and two, think about using technology which might aid them to do so. I think that's pretty much, like obviously as Tom Howard alluded to, it's going to look so different at under 9s, under 10s than it does at 15, 16s. But I think come the end of this process, myself and Hounsell would like to think that we could see players really like developing a big body of work that encapsulates some of the things that, one, we spoke about, 2, links into their targets, and 3, the season plan. So yeah, maybe something for us to present back to you guys at the end of this process, but quite confident the players are in a position where they could be comfortable with the setting they're in.
Yeah, it'd be. I think fast forward 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months time. I think it will be fascinating to look at the experience that coaches and players went through during this period of time, because I think it will shape us all fairly substantially. What that will look like will be really interesting. And I just wondered, something hit me there, Jos, when you were talking around. I wonder whether actually whether we've had to be more adaptable and flexible. If you're thinking we're working with players predominantly from Generation Z and their ability to engage in multiple different platforms, I wonder whether they're actually this transition has been far easier for them than we possibly realise, and actually the challenge has been for us maybe, and suddenly getting this shock to the system of not being able to interact with players and so on. Tom, Howard, I know you work with the younger age groups, and there must be some challenges to that. Do you think you've obviously got your group of players from the start of the season? Is there anything you've done that has allowed you to interact really effectively with both the players and the parents, I guess, of that particular age group?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be the first point I make, just around if we hadn't really committed to ensuring the relationship we share with their entire family wasn't really strong, then I think this issue would have been really, really problematic, because ultimately we're catching up with them at the moment in a similar way to in which we are talking now, and we have obviously access to see their houses, their gardens, and I think for some people, and probably most people, that's quite a personable thing as well. And I suppose maybe Jos and Hounsell have the ability that they've developed that relationship with players and parents over a slightly longer period of time, whereas we've only probably had that with the under-9s for maybe 6-7 months. I think that the nature of the conversations we've had with both players and parents in that format is probably testament to the work we do in ensuring that we have a really positive relationship with the parents and the players on a real personal level. I think just leading on from some of the things that both Tom and Jos have said, is that what we've tried to do, and I think what we've been able to do far more effectively than potentially we would have been able to do in the past, is the fact that all of the support networks that the boys have really come to the fore in this as well. So the interdisciplinary nature of how we work has been really effective. So the movement coach in head of phase support and how that works, we've tried to ensure, and then we've tried to implement the performance analysis side of stuff, obviously on probably a slightly less extensive level than what both Jos and Tom are utilising at the moment, but we still think that's important for them to gain an understanding of how that can help them. But the fact that we've been able to work really effectively together throughout the year has certainly helped the transition to being able to deliver that effectively now. And that I'm sure there'll be plenty of times where that will be a bit problematic about accessing certain stuff and all that, but we certainly feel that we've been able to make that transition as smooth as possible, just because of the fact that we make a conscious decision to work in that interdisciplinary manner as effectively as possible.
I think that's a really, really important point. I think sometimes we pay lip service and say we're doing it, but I think it's ultimately at times like this when the strength or weakness of those relationships really come to the forefront. And I think that would be one of the key things for me, the sort of interdisciplinary work, and not so much about the work itself, but the relationships we form with those members of staff, I think is really important. Just being slightly more critical of our own practice, what would you if you look back and knew this was coming, what would you change about your own coaching practices, your own behaviours, your own curriculums to allow a greater, more positive impact during this period of time? George, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, it's quite difficult because it's a unique situation, and probably start the season we'd never have envisaged this happening. So I don't want to make up an answer to fulfil the question. Really, I guess, like, ideally we used to do it at the club, but maybe some home task practice that potentially could run alongside some of the individual programs that were already in place, just to supplement the programs that we have at the club. We probably, similar to Chelsea, have 3 different model type of players. So we have players that are on our full-time program that get access to 5-6 plus a game sessions. So they potentially don't really need the topping up, which I'm sure they probably already do when they're not with us, maybe on the one day. So for them, maybe there isn't the need, but certainly for our sort of part-time players and hybrid players that don't have the contact time, I think it's definitely something that maybe retrospectively we could have had in place, where we're saying, okay, we only see you Tuesday, Thursday, and then a Saturday and Sunday. Okay, away from that, maybe one night a week, when the reality is a lot of these players and individuals are seeking counsel from individual coaches now, or going out to, with family, friends, which we fully expect and support to the local park or cage, goals, whatever it might be. That actually, when you're away from there, these are the types of things that you could work on to, again, align with the plans that you already have in place with the club. So yeah, I think that would probably be the one thing. We used to have a homework program when I first worked in the foundation phase, like a home weekly task thing. We've moved away from that, but potentially something to reflect on after this process.
Thanks for that, Jos. Mr. Hansel?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. Obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing. The only thing I'd probably add maybe is, and I think I've been really fortunate this year working with Jos, and because we've probably been afforded a bit of flexibility in the way in which we approach our coaching. So we've probably provided some opportunities for players to be engaged in feedback processes over a long period. I don't necessarily, I'd probably make any improvements there. I think just the one thing that definitely I think is probably just worth noting is just having a greater appreciation of players' context. I think we all think we know our players, but until this has happened, I don't think we've really dug really deep into people's home lives, and maybe it's not necessary all the time, but just finding out different things about different players, I think it's just been really valuable, and probably less around the actual player, but more just the support network that exists around them, in relation to where they live, from a geographical perspective, but also probably a socio-economic one, but then also just what their parents do, and having a greater appreciation of that. I think some of our players, parents, obviously key workers. So to have some of the conversations I've had across the last week has been really eye-opening, and I think it's probably taken everybody, the whole population of the country, to probably just sit back and reflect on what a great job those individuals do. So it's probably just given me a bit of a opportunity to reflect on that, and then also just when I'm pestering parents or players for being late to training, but their parents have just come off a night shift. It's just all those contextual things, I think, which just would be until this point probably haven't been that high on my agenda, where maybe they should have been.
Do you think on that, Tom, we'll put what we do into a greater perspective once this is all through?
Yeah, I also think I think the part that we have completely undermined in this whole process is just we provide an opportunity for players, we provide this care for these players over a sustained period of time. We have a huge connection with players across the week, which we've now in essence stripped away. And if you have got parents, for instance, who are out a lot of the time, the boys are now on their own. Like we play like a really important role in their like upbringing that probably has just been stressed and exaggerated even more through this period of time. And like the investment that we need to continue to make through this period is one that I think like goes way in above and beyond the actual need to like develop a coaching program. It's more just to show parents and players that we're invested in their development over this period of time. We do care about them. So I think not that I don't think we did that. I think obviously we were really well intentioned, but it's probably just the one thing that I've reflected on since this has come about, and trying to like probably consider like how or what that looks like in the day-to-day realities of our coaching practice.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. I know and Tom Howard, you'll back me up with this. The academy manager at Chelsea always talks about our role first and foremost being like youth development officers, not necessarily like a youth worker or as such, but that in the care and treating them as a player and person first and foremost. And during this time, I think is really important, and that's been the key message from the football club, is that you make sure the players are looked after, well before we start to impart any of their sort of program on them.
Yeah, Ezzy, can I just go ahead. Sorry, mate.
The only thing I was going to say is, I think that the 2 points that Jos and Tom make are the only things that I probably thought of as well. Because I think, in relation to your question, Ezzy, that if you look back and then try and implement stuff to cater for what's going on at the moment, then there's probably the issue of maybe coming away from stuff that's really important at the time. I think you've got to be careful that we don't fall into that trap when we restart as well. But just leading on from Tom's point, really, I think the catch-ups we've been having with players and parents have been able to be far more valuable due to the fact that we've had that sort of information about their whole family network before, and I think it just makes that conversation far more authentic, and ensures that we can still have a valuable half-an-hour conversation with parents rather than just checking how are you. Yeah, I'm fine, and that being it. Sorry, Jos.
No, it's fine. I was only going to add just one small thing. I think, like, the context that me and Tom are within the 15-16s group is like quite a vulnerable one, really, in terms of we're at that sort of key milestone where we're thinking about offering players a 2-year scholarship at the football club, and we're really fortunate, as you guys are at Chelsea, that we work with some extremely talented boys, and I think retaining our best players throughout this process is something that we just need to be acutely aware of, and the investment that, as Tom highlighted, is really, really important for us to allow players to understand that we do really care about them. We do really invest in them, even when we're away from the club, and hopefully that might just demonstrate our investment into them. So when we do get back to this process post coronavirus, then we're in a much better position, one, to have enabled some learning throughout this time, but also to just say to our players and parents, look, the club's a great place for you. These are the things we've put in place, and ultimately we want you to understand there's a real connection to the club, and can we continue this?
Yeah, I think that's some really good, excellent points that have been made. One final thing, just to sort of finish up with the point. For me, I've continued to question during this period of time how what environments have we created up to this point that allow to develop independent and autonomous thinkers and intelligent football players, and that's something I think I'll take away in terms of my own practice. How much time do we allow that to occur in our coaching? And the fact that we've had this period of time now, have players been able to do stuff on their own without necessarily the need for us to put a program in place for them to continue their technical, tactical, physical program. So I think that would be one of my sort of key things that I would want to continuously reflect upon and maybe have a think about how I and how we as an organisation begin to maybe develop players who can think more independently.
Yeah, Michael, just on that though, I think what you're talking about there is like spot on. Fall into is that they then fail to connect learners to what is to be learned, and I think it's achieving that whilst without undermining the position we have, which is as coaches we need to help facilitate that process.
Yeah.
So that's a really like intricate and probably quite complex skill in an environment that probably doesn't help facilitate it. Like one thing that you're not like, it seems strange because we have a lot of connection with the players, but one thing that academy football doesn't necessarily give players is a lot of time. Like they go from one component to the next component to the next component. We cram loads in, particularly when like every discipline wants some like time with the players. So like I think you're right, but I think it's around how we look at that as a program of learning, rather than what does this look like in my next session? It's actually like, well, what does that look like from an under 9 who joins us to an under 18 scholar? Like how do we get this process of this independence across time? I think that's really important. Probably one where we talk about season plans, but like how those individual plans connect to each other. So rather than having these like cycles of learning, or where we hit the refresh button every year and they've got to build these new relationships with coaches every year, actually we have this like process across time where we recognize how we're going to help develop these skills in like a more like longer term perspective, I think.
Yeah, and sorry, I don't want to sort of go off a tangent here, but I think for me this is a fascinating topic, and it sort of made me think about an Australian guy back in the 70s who wrote a book about sort of movement, and he spoke about learning in, through, and about movement, and how whether systems like the education system, maybe like the systems that we have in place, actually allow the learner to be included within their own own learning. And I think for me that will be. I think you're right. Whether the culture of the organisation or the culture of football allows players to have that, but I definitely think we probably facilitate a lot around the learning in and through, but whether we give enough time towards the about and maybe that why.
Sorry,
yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the generation a lot of us working at the moment are referred to as Generation Z. And there was a webinar last week from delivered by Johnny Noakes from Eton College, and he was speaking about the challenges that they face there in terms of how best to support learners from this generation and what generic qualities they might. He spoke about the fact that availability to like hyper customization, where they've in whatever they do, whether that's online in PlayStation games or in anything they do, that they tend to have this ability to individualize everything, even changing the color of their boots online or anything like that, and they're used to that availability. And he spoke about not undermining their ability to maybe customize things for their own benefit, and maybe this time period, and I think we've certainly tried to give even increased ownership to them about creating some activities that could benefit them. Yes, we've delivered some stuff to them in terms of what they could potentially do, but we've also encouraged them to come up with, and again I'm making this specific to under 9s, but them coming up with their own challenges to set each other has been really, really powerful, and what some of them have been able to do and share on the platform that we've been using to then spark other players to then challenge them has been pretty remarkable for 8 and 9 year olds, if I'm honest. So I think maybe just allowing them the opportunity to maybe chase that ability on a more regular basis might be one of the things that comes out of this, and feeling that we've got to take control of the process maybe as much. So
Yeah, that's something that stood out for me.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Tom. And I think that leads nicely into maybe sort of getting into some more detail now. Tom and Andy, from a Fulham perspective, can you sort of maybe discuss what some of the types of things you've been doing from a holistic point of view, like contacting the players down to a more technical, tactical, physical point of view? And then Tom Howard, what we'll do is we'll write all these down and then make sure we're doing them at Chelsea, all right?
The difficulty is you have to have the personal resource to be able to interpret them. So
that's a shame. You cut off then, Tom, so we didn't hear that. Sorry.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I think I briefly mentioned it earlier. Essentially, what we've given each player, and a lot of this has been directed by Mr. Hounslow himself. So I not really think it's too fair that he's allowed me the opportunity to share this, because a lot of the work that we've given the players is masterminded by himself. But essentially what we've done is categorised the players into some really small groups based upon target. So we've got, for example, the create and convert group together. So those boys that have got either releasing or ball striking targets, or even just really specific finishing targets. Then we've retrospectively gone through and collated as many clips as we possibly can based on their targets on the online platform, put them all together and coupled that with some European elite examples that either really personable to the players. So again, understanding the players is really important. We've built relationships, hopefully, into a place where we know which players people really find relatable. So for one of our players, that might be like a League Two footballer, and there's sort of extenuating circumstances why that is the case. But there's one lad that we have at the club that like watches a lot of lower league football. So again, we're really fortunate we have access to a platform where we can withdraw clips from League Two football. And then I guess merging some of the similarities between finishes and targets for both players is probably the next part. And then trying to merge those two things together to then set up a task where that we can try and get players to reflect on their own finishing, understand what like an elite example might look like, and then design a practice to enable the players to try and transfer some of those examples together. So I guess, we've essentially got sort of three components there: their own clips, elite clips, practice design, and then I guess the most important thing now is, one, the engagement and response from the players, and two, how we then support week on week throughout this process. Tonight we'll have a unit review with those players, so the 3 or 4 players that are in a group, and we'll get them to feed back to us about how they've engaged with the program that we've given them so far. So we'll get a little bit more feedback from players and peer-to-peer feedback, similar to what Howard said. So yeah, really looking forward to tonight.
Stuff.
Probably just to add to that, I think we've been really conscious about trying to integrate like the physical program with the work, like technical work. So we put everything in the same pack, really. So their physical, the stuff from like that they in essence get from strength and conditioning coach would be embedded into the same pack, and then almost just allowing players to be able to interpret that in their own way. The pack's designed just to create some inspiration, really, and that they're like, the challenge this week was to couple movements with finishes and just explore those, as well as obviously do some review tasks. I think the important thing that we want to do is just make sure that this is a process that basically continues as it would ordinarily be. Like the sessions that we do are like they're less prescriptive, they're just more like suggestive, really, and like they could either do those in a local park or down goals or wherever they are, or they could do them in their front room and they could finish through the door frame. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's more just about getting boys active and engaged in a process of something around their targets. And then I think like the wider piece here is that we would ordinarily do unit reviews at the end of the year. So we'll then just, the tasks that we're asking the players to do will just basically create this like summative piece where they'll feed back as a unit anyway. And that's probably a unit in a less traditional sense. So players who are in a unit will probably still play across positions, so that we have some connection between positions across units, rather than what like traditionally happened, which is like back four go together, and actually it's quite hard to connect the dots. So it's just like some ideas. I'd also just like to share, like I spoke to Max Squires, who's a master's student, so probably listening to this, so apologies if I do this a disservice. But he, in his role at QPR, they were doing a task where, very similar to FIFA, but it's like build their own pro. So basically they were like finding clips of pros in relation to the like espoused philosophy of the club, and then like building different components of each of those, and players finding those clips and like obviously reporting back on why they've selected those clips from those players. I just thought it was a really like innovative idea. So just like probably some good practice shared from our own like students. But I think this is like it really. It's like knowing your players, but then also having the capacity to be like creative about how you engage them.
Yeah.
I think just one thing to add in there, Z, is like a question that has been thrown up a little bit during this period is, are we trying to engage the players just to facilitate the time off, or are we actually trying to develop some of the learning that's already taken place this year? And I think like within our context, like I think it's been scrutinised a little bit, but hopefully the process that me and Tom have gone through is just, as I said at the start, just really want to stress this period is just, we've tried to make it, and it's not going to be organic, but just a continuation of the work that's gone on in relation to overarching group task and individual progress as well. It's not just, oh, we'll just find like a finishing like practice online and chuck a load of like best finishes in and off you go. It's actually want to just try and make this as coherent as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it also, it feels like 2 or 3 months ago, but it was only last week, and when this obviously first happened, and everyone was getting a little bit excited and carried away and trying to produce their own videos and sending clips out and stuff like that. And I think we, from a Chelsea perspective, we've been really conscious around how much the players, or how much we're sending out, bearing in mind that this last 2 weeks they've had school to contend with, obviously changing in ways of learning and so on. So I think it's a really good point, Josh. Tom, Howard, can you sort of give us an insight into what you've been doing with some of the under-9s, if that's okay?
Yeah, fine. I think a little bit like what you said there, Michael, about I think one thing we've certainly gauged from having conversations with them is that they have quite extensive school programs, and parents have been trying to ensure that routine is still there for them. So often from 9 till 3 or 9 till 4, when they're typically at school, that they'll be doing some really similar work. But what we've tried to do is create an online platform that they can then all log into, and a little bit like what I alluded to earlier in terms of ensuring that all departments have a role in this. So across the week, and again, we've tried to create a schedule that we've then shared with both parents and players, so that consistency that they obviously had before from Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, albeit tweaked, still remains, and they have this understanding that they know what's going to be delivered to them on a Monday, on a Wednesday, and when certain tasks that we might have set could potentially be submitted. And that's not to say that all players will have the same level of interaction with it, and I think that's absolutely fine, especially with the players that we're working with. So I think we've had some really positive interaction already, which is fantastic. And yeah, I think, as I said earlier, that what the boys have been able to produce for people of their age has been pretty outstanding, really. And yeah, I just think that what we've given them is of good quality, in terms of making sure that we've had the conversations between ourselves in terms of what we've then given them. But I think, yeah, I don't think we'll probably understand the full power of what they've been able to do over this period until until potentially after we've got through it. So yeah, it's been an interesting period, but one in which they've adapted to far than perhaps we have. So yeah, it's definitely been interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry, apologies. I've got children making their lunch and they've got no respect for their father in terms of his working space that is in the middle of the kitchen. Nice fridge, Jos, by the way. You've got some healthy.
Stop. Or
Thanks, mate. Yeah, chicken fajitas on the menu this afternoon.
That's good. That's what I like to see. Yep, good. Yeah. Just to sort of finish up with this topic, I think, we from the older players' perspective within Chelsea, we've again, no dissimilar to kind of what has been said there. We've tried to also allow them to be creative with their physical development program. So one of the things we've set them is to design and share their own game of Monopoly. So to sort of gamify their physical development program. So they'll have in orange maybe all mobility exercises. In blue, they might have all strength exercises. So just to sort of add some variation that they can either play socially with one another through FaceTime or other video conferencing calls or with their family at home. So it's been an interesting time. And I think what will be great, one positive outcome is that we'll all have lots of different resources to look back on and engage with as we get back to some sort of normality. And one of the key things that has come out from our conversations just now is around this, the fact that we've all tried to maintain some sort of structure in their lives, which I think is sort of a really important message. I'm conscious again, time flies when you're having fun. So we've been talking for nearly about an hour now, and I know some of our undergraduate students who are listening to this have definitely switched off the screen by now. Just to sort of finish up with, how have you spent your time outside of dealing with the players and so on? I don't know if you can share what you've tried to do or what you haven't had the opportunity to do.
Do you mean personally or professionally?
Professionally, Tom.
Well, I'm just asking because you were basically asking what we're doing with our time. I'm a bit lost in the question, mate, to be honest.
So I'm just suggesting that obviously a lot of coaches at this time, which you've been on through sort of social media, are trying to engage in webinars and reading additional material and, developing new session plans. I'm just wondering what opportunities have you had to do that? Or has it all been about the players?
Okay, sorry. So thankfully, we've been up so we can do an edit, so we can get rid of the first generic question. We can use the second one.
I'm not editing this.
Fine, no problem. I think it's really difficult because I think a lot of people have, and probably like similarly to what we're doing right now, we've just produced loads of content for people to engage in. And I also think there's probably an ethical or moral obligation from certain individuals not to try and monetize the situation, which is like people are like probably putting stuff out there at the moment, which seems like a really good thing, but probably just to promote their own like narrative, right? So trying to wrestle through that content is probably pretty difficult. I think it's important that like things that you engage with are meaningful and purposeful to yourself. So personally, I haven't had the opportunity, probably from a time perspective, to engage in anything other than Microsoft Teams meetings such as these. But I think it's important, probably, just to like reflect on how we're all dealing with this ourselves. The one thing that struck me the most through this period is just actually how much I like miss engaging with the players. So like, after our first conference call with all the boys, I was like really happy. I was like, this is I actually genuinely miss the engagement with these young individuals, and it's probably something that everybody's taken for granted, which is actually the reciprocal effect that they have on your own well-being.
Jos, notice how he didn't say staff there as well. He just said the players.
I've spoke to Tom more than any other individual during this period, so yeah, probably sick of me.
Have you had a chance, Jos, at all to sit down, maybe watch some? I know everyone's talking about watching Netflix and documentaries. And going on YouTube and stuff, and I'm going. I would love to know where they've got the time to do that. If I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think like if we want, as I said earlier, we want to try and show the players how invested we are in their development, even during this period. Then we have to live by that as coaches ourselves. So I'd like to think that like the level of time and care that we've put into the player pack so far have meant that we're really, really busy, and it doesn't feel like I've got any free time at the moment. I think it's just for this period, like in the next few weeks where we're really uncertain about any future timelines about return to training or play. Like we're still only in April, the season's not finished. There won't be any real retrospective reviewing of the season just yet, because, as I said, we want to try and continue where we are in terms of some of the season plan, individual plan work that's going on, and try and stretch out this period for the next few weeks. I think once that period's over and hopefully players have had quite a bit of content from us and there's maybe a little bit more normalisation around designing their own programs or practice, then we might start to really think about a robust review of the season so far, and then it will obviously link into some planning for next year.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jos. And Tom Howard.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything like Tom and Jos have said. The power of these conversations as well has probably been highlighted. I know all of us have know each other well before having this call, but I probably learned more about the specific nature of Tom's role at Fulham in just putting together these two podcasts or whatever we've decided to name them. And I think that we do have passing conversations quite regularly, but it probably just me for one, I've certainly enjoyed taking part in both of these, and will continue to do that moving forward. And sometimes it's quite a nice release from maybe the work we do at university and some of the work we do in coaching. I think it's a good development tool that we just get to express the work that we do. So I think hopefully that will be something that we then place more importance on when hopefully the football world comes back to a bit of normality.
Yeah, some really good points. From my perspective, I think, I haven't had the opportunity to do those things that maybe people are saying online, but it's definitely made me more, don't hold this against me, Tom Hounsell, in the future. Be more structured in my day, planning a lot more. And so I think I have learned a couple of things that will positively contribute to my development once this is through. Can I just apologise to everyone here and who's listening as well? Apparently, the last question I asked has ruined the whole momentum and flow of the conversation, according to Tom Hounsell. So this is new to me. So as Tom called me, Graham Norton. So I apologise. I will get better. I will go away and reflect after this, and hopefully.
How are you, mate?
Oh, Jos has had to take a phone call.
Yeah, that is definitely the end.
Yeah. Okay. So all right, we'll end the conversation there. Thanks, guys, for giving up your time, and we'll speak to each other this time next week.
No problem. Cheers, Parky.